Greetings, everyone. I will be sharing an interview with you that I did with my dear friend, Deb Soule, founder of Avena Botanicals in Rockport, Maine. We did this interview as part of the Healing Summit, Healing Ourselves, Healing Our World. And I think it's timely to share this with you now in that as of mid-January, the North Lunar Node went into Taurus and will be in Taurus all of this year, guiding us all to come back into deeper connection with the earth. And as we reconnect with the natural world around us, it is profoundly grounding for us and healing for us in this intense time of transition and transformation. The earth herself is in a time of transformation. And as we come into connection with her and are guided by the wisdom of the animals and the healing energies of the plants, we too can come back into balance and harmony and be in this change process in a more healing way for all of us. Enjoy this interview. So welcome everyone to our Healing Summit, Healing Ourselves, Healing Our World. I am thrilled to be interviewing my dear friend, Deb Soule, today. And let me give a little background information about her and then we'll dive into the interview. Deb is an herbalist, a biodynamic gardener, a teacher, and the author of 3 books: Healing Herbs for Women, A Guide to Natural Remedies, and How to Move Like a Gardener, and a new book that's just coming out this month, The Healing Garden, Herbs for Health and Wellness. And Deb grew up in a small town in Western Maine and began organic gardening and studying medicinal use of herbs around age 16. She continued with her love of plants and gardening, and in 1985 established Avena Botanicals and the herbal apothecary there in Rockport, Maine. And she has a BA in human ecology from the College of the Atlantic in Maine. And also, I think a critical piece of her history is spending time in Tibet and learning there about the Tibetan commitment to healing with the use of plants and prayer and other spiritual practices. And all of that is woven into the amazing healing work that Deb does. And she is committed to the healing benefits of medicinal plants and biodynamic gardens for us and for our planet. And I also want to say that I know of Deb's incredible passion and commitment to preserving the pollinators on our planet. So thank you for being here, Deb.
Thank you, Heather. I'm so honored and happy to be with you and sharing this conversation together.
And I have to say also that let everyone know that I also know Deb not only as my dear friend, but as the one who really trained me in herbalism. And at some point in this interview, I want to talk about how that changed my life.
Yes.
But share with us about how you initially became so deeply connected with plants and started on this path.
Well, I grew up in a rural part of Western Maine, and when I was young, like 4, 5, 6, my grandmother lived right next door to us, and she was hearing impaired, and with that, shall we say, gift challenge, she became incredibly attuned to the natural world, and that attunement that naturally came for her, I would say she really passed on to me by the way she would take me out in spring to be just sitting quietly and watching different spring birds arrive and watching different spring flowers, particularly what we call the Mayflower, trailing arbutus. So my grandmother really as a little tiny one, instilled in me just this deep respect and curiosity and deep, just like love and awe for the natural world that I was growing in. It wasn't like she ever just said, she never like said anything to me. She just would let me accompany her. And just her energy field of being so present and so attuned in other ways with just the beauty of spring unfolding and the beauty of birds and that the whole life of birds. Like she never even taught me the name of a bird. I mean, it was years later when I actually was given her bird book that I began to put that piece together because I have such a deep love of birds and particularly pollinators and the hummingbird being my favorite one. So it was just the gift of being with an elder who didn't need to say anything, just was mentoring me and just her presence.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that then continued to evolve and lead to your really being more invested in herbs and their medicinal uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, so say more about how it evolved for you to end up launching Avena.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. When I was a teenager, I hadn't grown up with having a garden, and I knew nothing about how carrots grow or tomatoes grow or anything. And I read the book Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lapay. This is back in the 1970s, and I was totally. It was like one of those moments in a young person's life where it was like the light bulb went off and I was like, I I want to know how to grow food. And there was an elder man in the neighborhood who my parents asked because he had a garden, and he started to show me like how you plant seeds and how you transplant. It was also my experience of he dusted some powder on one of his plants that burned my nostrils and my mouth. And this is, like over 50 years ago. I had never heard the term organic gardening, but I intuitively knew that there was something not right about that. So as I began a garden, and then like a year later, somebody sent me an organic gardening magazine. And then I started to put like, oh, there's actually a term for this world of gardening without chemicals. Because I didn't even know, I knew nothing about pesticides or herbicides or anything. So, I was literally, in the early 70s, there was just the very beginning of an understanding. Silent Spring came out when I was just barely a child, 1960. I was just like 3 years old when Rachel Carson's book came out to really begin to warn us. So that tasting, that smelling, I knew something was not right.
Mm.
And then a year later, somebody gave me my first herb book, and also I got to meet Stephen Foster, who is the medicinal herb grower at a Shaker Village in Maine. And it was like I fell in love. I was like, I knew that I wanted to be working with these healing plants, and that I knew that I wanted to contribute to the healing of people through plants. And it was like it was somewhere in me, deep inside of me, had this memory, I think, that probably I've done this before, and that I had come around again in this lifetime. And I just knew as a young person, like, I want to make this be my life's work to both help the plants and to help people. And
Mm.
so, I did. Actually, it was when I was a student at College of Atlantic. I spent 4 months, and it was actually in Nepal that I was in as a student. And
Oh, that's
that's
right. It
where,
was in
yeah,
Nepal.
and that's where I was introduced to both Tibetan Buddhism and to Tibetan medicine and to Ayurvedic medicine. So before I even really studied it as intensely as I have since that time, I had the great honor of being with healers who their lineages were several thousand years old. Both Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, where herbs are very, very prominent in their healing modalities. I had the opportunity to really be in the presence of some very wise old healers, and they all used prayer and meditation as part of their practice. And so I just will always feel so grateful that my introduction really to healing with plant medicines had a component of meditation and prayer. And that's when I was also given a prayer to say before I harvest plants. And I still say that prayer before I harvest plants. All these years, I've stayed faithful with that prayer of recognizing it's really important before I ever ask, before I ever approach a plant to actually pick it or gather it, that there's a conversation and that there is an ask, and that I spend several minutes in quiet and in silence before I actually gather plants, and I offer that prayer. For me, that's a really important way that I work with the plants. And so that began to, those seeds were planted when I was a student in, and when I was in Nepal. And then when I came back and I graduated and I worked on a few other farms, and I just knew that I wanted to be working with the medicine plants. And so somebody loaned me a little bit of money, and I started Avena in 1985, just in the corner of my house, little tiny corner, knowing I just was following that voice inside of me that said, yes, you must follow this path with the healing plants. And so Avena was born, at a time long before, it's been 36 years now when I first started Avena. And I started at a time where there was very little access for particularly women living in rural areas. And because I had grown up in a rural area, I am very, very sensitive to people living in rural areas. And so Avena started as a mail order business before mail order businesses were really, now they're all over the place, but it was before it was before computers, it was before the internet. People would mail me their order, with their check, and I would send out their herbs to them. So I really am kind of the one who started long before it's become like an industry. And I stay true to my heart and my passion and my deep gratitude for the spirit of the healing of these plants, and for all the ways that they help us to heal. And yeah. So
Which is one of the beautiful things that I love about you, and that I really experienced so deeply in the training that I did with you, is that you really honor your relationship with the plants and the consciousness of the plants. It isn't about how do we take from the plants what can help us heal on a physical level. You really honor that it is a relationship, and they are sentient beings, and that in being in relationship with them, they can heal us on all levels. Say more about that deep relationship that you experience with
and
plants.
I love what you said. I think relationship is such a key word here, because they are, for me, plants are these incredibly alive, intelligent, sentient beings. And that it's so important. And I think my grandmother somehow, without naming that language, she passed that on to me, that deep respect and reverence and some form of reciprocity with plants is really important. And so that's where I always make an offering, whether it's a prayer or a song or some little bit of an honoring of a sacred plant to give to a plant. That is so important to me, in recognizing there's a life that's being given. And for me, it's not just the physicalness of the plants. So we know that plants have such a range of, shall we say, different forms of actions, whether they help to ease a sore throat, or they help with any kind of inflammation in the body, or they help because they support, somebody has pneumonia, or there's such a range of ways that plants help the physical body. But they also, most important to me, is that each plant has a spirit, has an essence. And to really come into relationship with the spirit, the essence of each healing plant, just is the invitation is to quietly spend time with them. So whether we're sitting with a plant or kneeling with a plant, or if somebody needs to sit on a bench or whatever, however somebody can come to be in the presence of a healing plant, or maybe stand with a tree, because there's so many trees that give so much of their energy to us, or some of the taller, some of the taller healing plants, like I would say like echinacea, can be at least 3 to 4 feet tall. So sometimes I just stand in a whole bed of echinacea that's flowering. I mean, it's just so beautiful, these magenta colored flowers covered with bumblebees. So that relationship of coming to understand the real essence or the spirit of each plant, it really does require us to spend that time with the plants. And each of us will have our own personal relationship. So my relationship with echinacea, or with other plants, is going to be unique to me. And the relationship that you're going to be making with a particular plant is really unique to you. And that's why I also love to encourage, like in the book I just wrote, The Healing Garden, really trying to encourage people, if they have a small garden, or even if they can grow a few plants in pots, to actually be able to be in the presence of plants. And that intention, that mindfulness that we bring to just pausing, taking the time to really pause and come into presence, with our breath, and with that intention of like, I'd like to get to know you. Who are you, this beautiful plant? And that's how we begin to then understand, I think, the spiritual gifts that plants give to us. Because I remember many, many years ago, I was working on an endangered plant project on the big island of Hawaii. This is probably in 98. And there was a traditional healer. He was actually 90 years old, and he came to speak to us, and he looked right at us. And he said, you all think, that it's the chemical constituents of the plants that heal. But he said, in fact, that's not true. It's the spirit of the plants that heal. And that was over 20, almost 25 years ago, that I had that incredible gift of a wise elder healer speaking directly to us. And that really, I think that was like a direct transmission that came right into me. And that really helped me to even further my commitment and my just taking spaciousness and time with the healing plants. Um, so when I give a when yeah, when I give a plant to somebody, or when I'm sitting with somebody and listening to what could be of value to a person, I'm really listening between the words. I'm really tuning in to the energy that of this person, to the energy of what they're experiencing. And when I think about, for me, when I'm blending a formula, I'm always putting in some herbs to help support the spirit of this person's healing journey, whether that's through flower essences, or through an herbal tincture, an herbal glycerate, an herbal honey. There's so many different ways, because of the way that I gather and prepare medicine, that I'm inviting the spirit of the plant into that beautiful bottle of medicine.
Oh, it's beautiful, Deb. It's beautiful. And as I was saying at the beginning, I mean, working with you and learning that path of sitting with a plant and meditating and developing that relationship. I mean, when I did my training with you, we selected a plant to sit and meditate with and then make a flower essence. And if you remember, sat with red bee balm and really was given incredible guidance from that plant about the beauty of allowing your creativity to show, and how the bee balm would draw the bees and the pollinators, and just be in that celebration of life and creativity. And working with bee balm was what transformed my life from having intense anxiety anytime I was stepping out in any visible way to talk about my work with others. I would literally go into panic attacks. And it was through my relationship with bee balm and coming to honor bee balm and be in connection with the spirit of bee balm and using that flower essence, it literally cleared that and healed that and transformed that for me. And every day now in my own meditation practice, I honor and thank bee balm, and I grow it in my garden and I connect with it. And it's like a lifelong relationship now. And I think that's so beautiful, how we can form those relationships with plants who then become our healers and guides and allies.
Yeah.
It is a relationship.
I love hearing you share that story again. It's so beautiful, Heather. And I'm so happy for you that so much transformation happened for you, and that we have the gift of you speaking and sharing your wisdom, and that bee balm helped help support that gift that you bring to all of us. And that's the beauty of the plants, that they gift us with their medicine, and that we in turn, for me, I feel like that there's that reciprocity, that you bring so much to the world in your work, and that bee balm played such a beautiful role in helping that happen,
Mhm.
and that we are all the recipients of what you bring into the world. And something so simple and beautiful and powerful as bee balm, such an incredible plant.
Well, and it really so helped me to realize how much the plants want to be in relationship with us, want to support us in healing. And you could talk more eloquently about this, but I also feel like the plants are trying to help us humans wake up and come back into connection with the earth,
Yes.
realize how we are all interconnected.
Yes, it's such a beautiful way. I think that plants have such an incredible consciousness, and that's a piece of what we're talking about here, is that as we as humans are also, our consciousness is evolving. The plants, they probably are just like so relieved when they see some of us being willing to recognize that, yes, this is a time of a lot of evolution and transformation, and that they play such a key role in part of the whole Earth's evolution. And humans, we are part of this evolutionary process. And for me, it's so important to be really teaching people to really respect plants and trees. I mean, really all the elements of soil, earth, and water, and these incredible plants and seeds, and the warmth, of the sun and the light of the moon, all of these elements that are so important to me in the healing process, that plants also embody all of those elements, and bring to us, both the gift of healing, and also I think they expect from us too, that we show up and be willing to respect them and be willing to protect them, which is also, I think, the call to any of us, who really, to all of us, because all of us rely on plants for food, for shelter, for our clothing, for our medicine. So I hear this a lot right now, like they're really asking us as humans to step up and be willing to be advocates for the soil, for the water, for all of life. Because if we're not, none of us are, as humans, are at risk. And it's painful to see species going extinct every single day.
Well, and what you're saying is so important, not only in terms of our honoring the sacredness of the lives of the plants and trees around us, but in your work and in the work of Zach Bush and others who have researched and shown so clearly how our health, our immune systems are so intricately connected with the health of our soil.
Yes.
Our microbiome is connected to the health of the soil around us and the food that comes from that. So our very lives depend on honoring the earth and the soil and the plants.
Yes, and I love that he's really brought that connection forward, and I love that he's a medical doctor, so there's that whole piece that he brings. And it's for me, I say it's sometimes I use the term ojas, which is it comes from the Ayurvedic tradition, but for me it's like the life force, the vitality that we need to be nourishing in soil to really revitalize soil, because so much soil has really been devitalized by the overuse of pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers. It's like we are being asked to really revitalize all of agriculture. And indigenous people around the planet always knew, how do you take care of what feeds you? And so, it's interesting that we're coming back around now to people talking about regenerative agriculture, which is really comes from indigenous people's wisdom. It's not a modern day thing. We have to really give honor to where that whole understanding comes from, to really give great thanks and gratitude always to indigenous people who are willing to share their understanding of life and soil and plants and medicine plants and food plants and seeds. We have so much gratitude to give, and not to be appropriating, but we need everywhere to be having a strong movement towards the regeneration of soil. That's why I came to biodynamics, because there's these homeopathic herbal preparations that we are using to enhance not just the physicality of the soil, but the spirit and the essence and the vitality of soil. That's for me where, and I think that's also a very ancient indigenous understanding. I've never yet met an indigenous person to be able to have that, which I someday will, to have an understanding of how they speak to soil and the spirit of soil. So my understanding really has come from my studying biodynamics, coming also out of a really esoteric tradition coming out of Europe. So it is, some of my roots are Mediterranean and Northern European, so there's a resonance for me with a part of the world where some of my roots come from. So I think that it's so important that we honor the life of soil, the spirit of soil, and that it translates into, healthy soil grows really vibrant, healthy plants that also have a vitality and a life force that when we take them in, yes, it's helping to support the microbiome, and it's also helping to support our own spirits. So there's a physical response going on, but there's always an unseen spiritual response that's going on when we approach the plants in this way. Not just how can you support my microbiome, but
Yes,
how can I in the
exactly.
bigger picture understand that the microbiome of the soil, absolutely. And it's also recognizing that soil has spirit. And so, how do I honor the spirit of soil and the spirit of water, the spirit of trees, the spirit of every single healing plant, the spirit of the moon, and the spirit of all the planets, the wisdom they bring? There's spirit in all of this.
Oh,
And
it's so beautifully said, Deb. And that is the ancient wisdom and what indigenous cultures so know in the fabric of their being, that it is, again, about being in relationship, that we're all interconnected, and that everything, all of the life around us is sacred and sentient. So, how do we be in relationship in a way that we're honoring the plants and the trees and the soil and coming to them with gratitude? Not coming from a place of disconnection and how can you help me or feed me, but how do we honor that we are a part of this amazing web of life?
yeah, respect. I mean, that I would say that I'm so grateful to my grandmother. The other word that comes to me, which is connected to hummus, of that, which is incredibly really enlivened organic part of soil is also humble and humility. And I think that my grandmother really, as I was working on this last book and really honoring my grandmother, I realized, oh yeah, she modeled humility for me. And also the way that she would sit quietly with the spring flowers and the blooming apple trees. She she really embodied humility. And it's taken me a long time. We go through these different seasons of our lives also, and as we come into the, a more the older part of our lives, I really have come to recognize, she was also teaching me about humility. And
Mm.
so when I'm on my knees, um, in communication with plants or speaking with plants, singing with a plant, I realize that teaching from her of humility is so foundational to how I come to be in communication and to be in relationship with a plant. So always I honor Catherine, my grandmother, for that way of transmitting such a powerful teaching. And and my own development, as I say in my book, I've made repeated mistakes in my life. It's a journey of to be it's so humbling to be human. In the journey of learning and growing and healing and making mistakes and apologizing and to continue to learn and to grow. And I feel like plants, through herbal teas, through flower essences, through herbal tinctures, through this, just the smelling of them, being in their presence, being in a garden, all of these ways, I think that I consider plants to be my elders. So they are guiding us, and they're probably, laughing with us and kind of at us when they see us make mistakes, not in a mean way, but they're like, yes, there's another human trying to, to develop her humanness.
Absolutely. I experience that, especially with trees.
Yes.
They're these amazing healing witnesses and elder guides, and, just hoping that we will wake up and learn like they have to be deeply rooted in Mother Earth and open to the sky and aware that, as they're connected with their root system, that we're all interconnected.
So beautiful. I also wanted to say, in the sense of gardens, the hummingbirds, who are my favorite bird and my favorite pollinator, I'm also just like so aware of they embody so much healing energy. And that for those of us in the Americas, North America, Central America, South America, this is, you know, obviously America is a modern day term. It's not an indigenous naming, but that these three Americas are where the hummingbirds, there's over 340 species of hummingbirds. I think in what we call North America, we may get visited by about 18. So there's this amazing magic that's going on. And so for us here, where you are and where I am, we are visited by the ruby-throated hummingbird. May they keep coming for dozens and dozens and dozens of more years. And they come, and this is where they make their nests and they have their babies. And then they all have this amazing, incredible connected way of knowing where to winter. They know when to leave and to go back. But I just want to encourage people who live where there are hummingbirds to be growing flowers that attract hummingbirds, because their energy is so healing to be around. For me, I mean, I've been really observing them for over 25 years, and they have taught me something about stopping and really coming into presence. They invite that, to really be watching what are the flowers that they're receiving their nectar and nourishment from. And just their energy is just so incredibly invigorated. I mean, I feel like just when I'm in their presence, I feel invigorated. My energy really starts to rise up and feel really enlivened. And they're magical beings. There's so much we could say about them. They're just extraordinary pollinators, and the gift of all of our pollinators. Different people probably connect differently with different pollinators. For me, it is the hummingbird. And just just to pause, and it's amazing when they whiz by us, or when they come and they hover right in front of us, or when I often will sit in meditation really close to a whole area of flowers that I know they come to at first light, because I love to arise and be in the garden at first light. And it's amazing to watch them go from flower to flower, and just that way that they are so attuned to the flowers. And one of my teachers, Rocio Alacon, who's an amazing teacher from Ecuador, who's really bringing forth the medicine of hummingbirds. Her grandmother, her grandmother is a traditional healer from the mountains of Ecuador, and really worked with hummingbird medicine. But she always will say to me, go and just touch the flowers where the hummingbirds have touched. Just that touching will also bring their medicine into us, and allow us to also feel that sense of joy and presence and delight that I think most of us feel and have the experience of when we're in a garden and in their presence. So I'm trying to encourage more and more people to be growing flowers depending on where you live in these three Americas, because the hummingbirds come, and different species come into the west coast of North America than for us here in the East Coast. But to have that experience of being in their presence is just
Oh,
so
yeah,
uplifting.
they're extraordinary. And I experience with hummingbirds in particular, their energy of joy.
Yeah.
And when I was going through a very intense time of transformation in my life, and going through this kind of massive death rebirth of my identity, and moving from California to the East Coast, when I would be overwhelmed with anxiety, I would go and sit in my garden, and this particular hummingbird would come to me and hover right in front of me. And I felt in such an extraordinary way, she was comforting me and supporting me in the journey that I was on, and reminding me just to be open to joy.
So beautiful.
They're extraordinary beings,
They are.
and that they fly such long distances. I also feel like they are teaching us about having the courage to follow the path that we're meant to be on, and to know that we're supported in that.
It's so beautiful how you just said that. And when you think about, the ruby throat, who migrates for up to 3,000 miles, the ones here in North America, the ones in South America, they don't migrate the same way. But these, the ruby throat particularly is one of the ones that makes the longest migration. Like you said, they're on this path, and they know the path that they're on, and that they can be a teacher for us in that way is just, and a gift to us to recognize that. I think they are so beautiful in their spirit that they also bring to us, the essence of who they
Yes.
are. And for me, they've really allowed me to just slow down so that I can be much more in relationship with the all the plants, the spirit of the plants, the essence of the plants. And the hummingbird really helps me to kind of come into that more open space where I moved into a little bit of an altered space where I can begin to receive the messages from the plants and the hummingbirds, where that linear way of thinking, it has a little more spaciousness, not in charge as much, that we can expand to the larger teachings of the plants and the hummingbirds.
Beautiful. And what's beautiful about that too, Deb, is, and I so honor how you walk your talk. You live this. And I love how you spend most of April through October living in the garden, and often sleeping in the garden, and just being with the plants. But also how one of the things that I've observed with you is you're a highly sensitive person. And I think being with the plants, and this is a hard time to be on this planet as a highly sensitive person, and yet being with the plants who are so acutely sensitive and so nurturing and supportive can help us feel safe to open to those aspects of ourselves.
It's beautiful how you said that, which is why I hope that we're going to see more and more people gardening and adding in, healing plants into their garden or pollinating, pollinator flowers. And that I'm hoping that more and more public green spaces will stop using pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers, and that we're going to just see more and more the greening of just everywhere. It's just so important to be able to, as you said, to feel connected in a world where there's tremendous amount of disconnect and a lot of toxicity that's really painful, and a lot of very different people and in parts of the world where people who have are fleeing for their lives, where there's refugees, and as you said, there's just a lot of difficult places, even right in the United States. The history here is just such a painful history of the genocide of indigenous people in what we know of today as North America, and also the enslaved people who were forced to come here and to work in the cotton fields. So there's so much healing happening in those communities, and in, I would say, myself as a white person learning history that I knew nothing about growing up. So there's just so much need and call for re-education, relearning, remembering, healing for
Uh,
each of us.
and I really believe what I've heard a number of shamans say, that if each of us, in whatever way we could, given our living situation, if each of us had some semblance of a garden, even if it's just a potted plant that we're honoring and in relationship with, it would heal us and change our lives and change our planet.
I believe that very strongly. My teacher Rocio has often said that you're going to see, wherever there's more green, there's more plants, there's more life, there's seeds, forming and being shared. There's a possibility of a lot more life and healing. And that when there are places where landscape has been decimated, you also see a lot more suffering, and you also see a lot more war. So
Total
just
sense.
the creating of, like you said, whether it's just even one pot that somebody has, because people, if they're on top floor of a city building, they can have a few house plants and let that be where they're making
A
a really,
healing relationship.
because plants are breathing. There's just a constant, incredible rhythm of breathing, and we're taking in and giving back. There's just such a beautiful giving and receiving that happens with plants.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, and tell us about your new book that's coming out.
Oh, well, I have one copy. I have it here in the Healing Garden. And yeah, it's going to be coming out in March. And I was asked to write a book by a publisher. Princeton Architectural Press asked me to write a book that really had a big focus on drying herbs. And I realized that there aren't really any books for more gardeners and small scale herbalists to understand how to create a drying room and how to create drying racks and how to really understand, how do I dry herbs. So that was the request, but they were wonderful to work with, and I got to collaborate with this incredibly beautiful photographer, Molly Haley, who we have had so much fun with this book. So there's over 200 color photos in the book, but the first chapter is called Gathering with Gratitude. So I really begin the whole conversation with plants, a little bit along how we just spoke, and about connecting and communicating and making relationship. And then I really describe, this is how you dig roots, medicinal roots. This is how you gather medicinal leaves like lemon balm and tulsi. And this is how you gather flowers, like rose and calendula. And this is how you gather seeds, like from the hawthorn berry trees or from schizandra berry vines. So I give people this, giving people instruction, like this is how you can really gather these different parts of the plants and their relationship, earth, air, fire, and water is related with the different plant parts. And then I give really detailed instruction on how to dry herbs, because that's coming from, my years and years of in my own home drying herbs, but also on our biodynamic farm here, at Avena Botanicals, we have two beautiful drying rooms. So I was able to both, while I took pictures of the drying room, and I also really outlined all the different ways that we really specifically um, follow in our drying rooms. Yeah. And so in many
Beautiful.
ways I was really thinking about gardeners when I wrote this book, because so many people garden and love to garden, and I wanted to really encourage more and more gardeners to grow more medicinal plants and to have some skill set. And oh, how do you make a tea from fresh herbs, or how do you make a tea from dried herbs, or how do you make an herbal honey, or how do you make an herbal tincture? So the third chapter in the book is very specific instructions about how to make all kinds of different herbal preparations. And though there are some other herb books out there that are wonderful that offer some instruction, I really gave instruction from my own direct experience from over 40 years of making medicine, including how to make flower essences. And then the last chapter, the book, I was limited. I was given so many thousands of words I could write. So I had to, I could have written more, but I wrote about 18 different medicinal herbs. Like I wrote about anise hyssop, and I wrote about black cohosh, and I did write about calendula and rose and lavender and lemon balm. So I wrote about herbs that are really easy to grow, that are, I think, really valuable for people, for gardeners to be able to put into their gardens. And then I gave really good instruction, like this is the part of the plant that you gather, this is how you gather it, this is how you dry it, this is how you can prepare it for all kinds of different herbal medicines. So I am excited about the book. And I also wove in just some of my own journey with recognizing that I live in unceded territory here in what is today known as Maine. I live in Wabanaki territory. And so I do speak to just encouraging each of us to learn about who are the indigenous people where we live, who are their names, are they still here? Do they still speak their language or not? We have lost so many indigenous people's languages and so many different indigenous people because of the genocide in this country. So for myself, I identified as a white, as a white identified woman. I really am, the invitation in this book is to also, wherever we live, to begin to educate ourselves more if we are not aware of the history of what happened, including if somebody is living on land that was once worked by enslaved people. So that's an important theme that I also kind of wove in thinking about ecological justice and land justice, because we're talking about these healing plants, and yet where many of us live, there's also a very painful, horrific history that's kind of in the body of the earth. So
Mm.
creating healing gardens and an awareness of this history, I think is also really necessary for this time that we're in, for the bigger transformation that is asking us. So for me, as a white person, it's really important that I take on not just reading something, but also am figuring out how this land is going to go back into becoming a land trust that's going to be associated with some indigenous people, and that this land will always be a place for medicine plants to be growing and to be giving away, you know as much as we can give away to indigenous people for their community clinics and for their gardens, because we all need to be, I think, having access to the healing plants.
Well, and I think you're speaking beautifully to how we also can then heal some of the wounds from the past and how that's been absorbed in the earth where these tragedies have occurred, and how, as we bring that into our consciousness and come into a healing relationship with the land, we can heal that and then heal the wounds that we have in relationship with each other.
Yeah, and I think that plants and gardens, in many ways, the language of the plants offers that possibility of that there's a common language here and a respect, and there's so much work ahead, and each of us needs to find our way that's deeply respectful. But the language of the plants, there is a common language there, and they
And a common Mother Earth.
and we all care deeply for her flourishing.
Yeah.
And that's, that obviously is, those are really original instructions from indigenous people. And I think wherever somebody has come from, for people who know about their own lineage, to be able to go back and as far back as anybody can go, to also learn about the plants that their family really relied upon, and the different gardening methods that their family may have relied upon. If there's still that information, there's a lot of people who don't have a connection with their lineage, but for people who do, there is that possibility of being able to um, remake that connection to the plants, and to the plants that are, for me, because some of my roots are Mediterranean, I've always really loved the Mediterranean herbs like lemon balm and blessed thistle and milk thistle and lavender and calendula. And then I began to realize, oh, these are plants that are like in my DNA in a way. These are the plants
Right.
that my Mediterranean ancestors really relied upon. And though I don't have a connection because of certain aspects of my family's disconnect, I still have developed my connection with my roots because of the plants. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing all of this healing wisdom with us today. And tell us the website for Avena if people want to reach out to Avena to order herbs.
Yeah, it's Avena Botanicals. So it's just botanicals with an S. So it's just avenabotanicals.com. People can go and see all the medicine that we make. And there's also a lot of YouTube videos that I've made giving herb walks and talks in the garden. So they're up on our YouTube channel, which has been really fun for me to be able to take people on walks in the garden. So people who live far away can see some of the beauty of the garden. And yeah, so
Beautiful.
thank you, Heather. It was
Thank you,
really,
dear
really
friend.
so fun and so beautiful to have this time with you, and just wishing everybody great joy with the plants and the planets, because they are such a beautiful connection.
Absolutely. Thank you.